Hi again. Welcome back to CS170 fall session. We're looking at arrays from chapter 20 for this week. So this is part 2 of the arrays section. So we'll be looking at a couple of different things, drill down a bit what we covered from the last part with arrays. So if you remember from the last lecture, we had arrays, we had declared them, we had initialized them. We were able to assign values to them. We were able to read values from them. And, you access it with like these names to the bucket 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You treat them like variables, really, right? Either to assign them or to read from them. But when you look at the indexing here, indexing is what we talk about when you're looking at these numbers here for the array buckets. You look at the indexing, there's many ways to actually come up with it. This is like the standard way, and like what I demoed to you before, where I actually did the for loop and iterated through it, like starting with 0 to the length of the array. That's not the only way you can index it, right? It just has to evaluate to a number, right? And so in this case, we set up this array here of 7 elements. And we declared a standard variable. This is not an array, right? This is just a variable called do equals to 2. And then you can look at each of these, right? This is the standard one, right? Where we say this array element 0 equals to happy. This array element 1 equals to sleepy. But then we look at this where they actually stuck the variable do in here, right? And that's 2. So that means this evaluates to 2, which is the same thing as if I had put in a 2 here. And the same thing here, where I take the variable +1, right? Because this is recognized as a number, right? You can see here by the fact that I didn't put like quotes around the 2, it knows that this is a number. Okay, if I put quotes around it, then it was going to think that this is a string of 2. But because I didn't put the quotes around it, it's going to be treated as a number 2. So 2 + 1 equals to 3. So that evaluates to 3. And so that's like the element or box 3 here, bucket 3, to get to sneezy, right? And this one is 2 times 2, which is evaluates to 4. Bashful, and then this is 3 times 2, which is 6, minus 1, which evaluates to 5. And you get grumpy. And then you have 2 times 2, which is 4. 10 minus 4 is 6, equals to doc, right? So that's really just an example of how you don't actually have to just type in the numbers 0 through 5 or 6 or however many. In this case, it's 6. It just has to evaluate to a number, and then you can reference it, right? So there's times where, you could set variables and, you could do different things to, store values based on user input or whatever. And then that's what will feed into accessing whichever element in the array that you're looking for, okay? So, so this is an example of, doing indexing by assigning values that come from like some sort of calculation, okay? Right, and then this is like doing an arrays and loops example, and this is pretty much like what I did here in the last lecture, okay? So this is just a different type of example, but it's the same thing, right? In this case, each time they go through, they're taking the element and setting it to I times 3, right? So this is what's iterating, which is the I, right? And then you take that multiply by 3 and assign it to each element as you traverse the array of math answers, okay? So yes, a slight variation on the one that I did for you, where I took this for loop and worked my way through the hours worked array, okay? So something you can take a look at. You want to try it on your own. That's another one that you can play around with. And then if you remember from a while ago during the loops lecture, I was referring to this as a simple array. Excuse me. And something that we did here was declare the array people, and it didn't really become an array until you did the new array part here. And then this is the actual initialization of the array, right? So you initialize the array by putting in all of the different values. And in this case, these are strings of names of people, okay? And then this is the for loop to iterate through that array. Okay. So I'm here. And then we'll do the simple array here. Same type of thing here. You have all the different names in the people array. And then you're iterating here in the second part here. Now there's another example here where it's kind of putting together the array with doing the random number thing. So you remember, I forgot which lecture I did a couple of lectures ago, where you would take the random number, right? You remember the math.random function is generating a number between 0 and 1, right? But then how do you make it do a random number between 1 and 10, let's say, or 1 and 100? So that's what this is doing here, right? Remember we did the math floor, right? And then we have the range here, okay? So this range is what's passed into this function, right? So when you pass in, like, let's say my range is going to be like 10, right? Then you're going to do a math floor of the math.random times the range, right? And then you're going to return the rand, right? Which is random number, okay? And you remember when I did the example, I did a +1 at the end. So I kind of shifted it. But because we're dealing with arrays where the first number starts off with 0, this actually works out pretty well. So your first number of whatever range it is, let's say I put in a range of 10, your first number is going to be 0, and then it's going to go up to 9, right? So something to keep in mind, if I want to do the random numbers so that I can access the different elements in the array, then you don't need to do a +1, right? But if you're dealing with different things where you want to kind of say, well, I have 10 numbers and it starts from 1, then you just do a +1. A bonus question you might think about when you want to go to, excuse me, if you want to, let's say you want to do a random number between 2 and 11. So instead of doing a +1, you can do a +2, right? So there's different ways you can look at this depending on what types of random numbers you want to generate, okay? Right, and so this function basically takes the random number and comes back and picks something out of the array. In this case, it's going to pick the name Eduardo, okay? So I think you remember, like in the last lecture, I did this thing where we accessed the element, get element by something, okay? So that was when we were doing the checkbox. I don't think I still have that window. No, I don't. But you remember we did the document .get element by ID, and I think it was red, right? Because we were checking and unchecking the red radio button. So in this case, we're accessing the element by ID of person, okay? So you can see this, right? This is your, you remember your P tag here, right? And then you're setting this to be person here, okay? And then based on this ID being person, you get this document like that, right? And that's how you access this, okay? So it's not really related to the topic of array, but maybe I want to demonstrate this a little bit more on the js.do here, okay? So let me pick this up here like this, and then let me put that here. Okay. Gee, I made a mistake here. I need to go down to right here, which is the HTML part, if you remember. Remember all the stuff at the top, that's like under the script tag here. That's like JavaScript, right? So this is not the JavaScript until you get to on click. So some people, I think maybe were a little bit confused. What is JavaScript? What is HTML? HTML is basically like these tags that you can put, formatting, you can put like, the text box or whatever. JavaScript is essentially like what comes out from the event, which is on click, right? So anything where it's like on click and you have this double quote here, like that, anything inside of that, that's JavaScript, okay? On the outside, we have the button, you have the P tag here, that's HTML, okay? So here, I'm not gonna mess around with the random number bit, but you can see that from the slide here. And I'm just gonna hard code this to say, I did a caps lock here. And one thing you might also want to know, the on click is double quote. So since I'm doing another quote in here, instead of using the escape characters, I'm just going to use a single quote in here. So it would be like this. All right, so now I've assigned the variable lucky one. I've hard coded to a name instead of doing like that whole array and random number function there, just so I can quickly get this out. And then now we have to document get element by ID, person, enter HTML, right? And what this does, it looks at this P down here with the ID of person. That's how I'm accessing this, okay? And it's assigning this to be this string, which is a concatenation of this bit here plus the variable lucky one, okay? Like so. All right, so let's see if we can run this. And then I'm going to hit the choose. And we have that. Okay. So I know this is not really part of arrays, but I think probably we didn't really cover the get element by ID too much. So I figure we can hit that here to follow up on the use of it in the other lecture that I gave. Okay, so this is just another example of using get element by ID. So this is probably a better way to demonstrate the output from, let's say, your variables, something like this, as opposed to using like the text box dot value and setting that in there, right? Because you don't see like the outline of the text box, right? So this looks more natural from an HTML perspective, I mean, a browser perspective, right? Instead of seeing a text box with that string in there. Okay, so that's like a little bit of a sidebar, but hopefully that gives you a better understanding of how the get element by ID works, right? You want to refer back to the other lecture to talk about accessing the radio buttons to maybe uncheck or check the radio box. Then you can look at that. Okay, so this is just one of those things where if you want to implement this function, that's fine. So you remember from up here, you have the random number. This is the actual function for pick random number. And this last bit here. So at the time this was developed, this was like one of those extra credit problems. I'll leave it up to you whether you want to do it. If you have time to do it, that's fine. If you don't, that's up to you also, okay? But I'll just talk you through this in case you want to do it. You probably end up doing something similar to this on the exam, right? So you're going to create an array called days, right? We did that here, right? I did like hours worked actually. So you can do that. And then you can use an initializer for this. So all that means is you can initialize it this way, or you can initialize it this way. So if you do like a initializer, I think probably like doing it like this, kind of initialize it as you're declaring the array, like so, right? In this case here, you're basically creating the array and then you're assigning the values to each element in the array. Okay, so that's the difference, right? So when you do it initialize, you initialize when you create the variable like so. And then hours work, you remember that array, that was the one I created as an example. Okay, initializer for this now, that's fine. Then you can create a function that basically goes through each day of the week with the associate hours to find the total pay. Okay, and you remember from one of the extra credits from one of the other lectures talking about calculating your pay plus your overtime if you go over 40 hours. Okay, so again, like I said, in past classes, we've run this as an extra credit problem, but I realized that you have other things going on, so you can do this if you want. If you don't want to do it, that's fine, and you can maybe do one of the other two problems from the last lecture as extra credit. Okay, so I'll leave that choice up to you. All right, so this concludes the arrays topic. So I'll be posting this shortly.